Welcome to the couch. I have something to talk to you about. Mental illness is a tricky thing. The problem is that the stigma is so great today. We need to change that. I've spoken around the nation and I've asked a question to almost everywhere I've spoken at. And I've asked these teens, parents, administrators, I've asked them, when I say the word mental illness, what comes to mind? The answer I usually get? A hobo on the side of the street muttering to himself. And that makes me really sad because technically, I'm mentally ill. Technically, more than 1 in 4 of the teenagers around you are mentally ill. That's real. That's truth, according to the CDC. So I think we need to change our perspective on what exactly is mental illness. We need to change how we view these words, and we need to break the stigma. So what is mental illness exactly? It's complicated, and we don't understand everything there is about the mind. It's an enormously complicated piece of machinery with so many things going on. However, what we have learned is that mental illness is a result of your genetics and or your situation. So you get past, let's say, the trait of depression. You get past this trait through your blood. So you get it through your parents, you get it through their parents, and so on and so forth. So you receive this genetically. Of course, you might not if your family doesn't have a history of this. But we also bring in the situation. Now, usually professionals will say that, yes, you can be genetically predisposed to have mental illness. But usually, there's a trigger. There's a trigger where you could say it's building, like it's a long-standing trigger of maybe something bad in your life, maybe you're bullied, and just something over time just wears you down, and brings you into depression. Or you could have something more sudden, more serious, such as if you experience some kind of trauma, then that could be a trigger. And that could lead to that mental illness, whether it's depression or anxiety or something else. So that's what a trigger is. That's what a situational depression is. Of course, there is no hard, fast rule on this. You could be simply genetically predisposed and simply just fall into this over time with no apparent trigger. Or you could have really no history of this in your family, yet suffer from some kind of trauma, have some kind of situation going on, and fall into this. So there's no hard, fast rules when it comes to it. The most important thing to look for is look in your family bloodline and look and say, is there people in our genetics with mental illness? And if there are, especially if there are a significant amount, you and your children are much more likely to suffer from this. What mental illness does or is chemical imbalances in your brain. Now this gets to a point highly specific, extremely complicated, and could take hours and hours to really unravel. And again, we don't know everything there is about this, but what we do know is that when chemicals become unbalanced, this can happen between interactions with the neurons where maybe dopamine, which is a feel-good pleasure chemical, maybe lack of it or a reduction of it than normal brains. Maybe you don't have enough dopamine, maybe you don't have enough endorphins, or there's all these different chemicals in your body, especially in your brain, that maybe you could have imbalances of. And this can lead to the altering of your moods. This can make you sad or not able to sleep. All these different factors that are going on in this enormously complicated piece of machinery that is your brain and your body interact with each other in so many different ways. So that is essentially what mental illness does or is this chemical imbalance in your brain. This is a medical disease, just like cancer or diabetes. So you see, there's nothing to be scared of. It's simply a disease that you inherit, just like other diseases, or that because of a situation. So this could be like if you break your leg because of a situation, nobody's gonna think it weird. Of course, they're gonna feel sad and be like, oh, I wish it didn't happen, of course. But you're not gonna hide your broken leg. You're not gonna keep it secret. You're not gonna avoid talking about it. You don't feel uncomfortable so much, to a certain extent, you don't feel so uncomfortable. Whereas if you look at depression, just another thing that can happen because of a situation or because of genetic traits, you don't want to talk about it. You don't want to mess with it. You just want to leave it alone. You don't want anybody to know. And that's due to the massive stigma against this. People say mental illness, oh, you're crazy, you're dangerous. First of all, I want to address this. Crazy doesn't mean anything anymore. We say tricks on skateboards are crazy. We say all these videos are crazy. Oh, that person is crazy. It doesn't mean anything. So stop labeling yourself as crazy, because what does that mean? You could look at a skateboard trick and go, dude, that's crazy. That's a good thing. So, from that perspective, you could say, right? So it doesn't mean much anymore. And so avoid using that word as a label, or using that word really in general, because it leads to this stigma, and as part of this stigma is the way we misuse our language and we misuse these words. But the most important thing out of this is what to do. I have a symptom list on my website, which I will link to in the description below, so make sure you check that out. It's a symptom list with most of the main symptoms, almost all of the main symptoms of depression, with some anxiety in there, is different mental health challenge that you can experience that can lead to depression, which is one of the most common mental illnesses out there. So look at that, read that, look through it for yourself or people you know, and know that so when you see somebody act a certain way or do something or say something, you can say, whoa, I saw that was a sign of depression, maybe I should be worried. And then you look closer and you say, hey, I see this other symptom as well. Oh, I see this other symptom as well. This has been going on for a while. This is serious. And that is when, this is the most important step, that is when you tell somebody. This is where you tell your parents, you tell a school counselor, you tell a therapist, an aunt or uncle, somebody who can help you. Because after you communicate with somebody, the next step is to get an assessment by a doctor. You go to a doctor, he or she will give you a list of symptoms, and you'll spend some time just marking them down, which ones you feel, to what severity. I went through this, I did this exact same process. Don't be scared of it. I did this all, nothing to be scared of. You simply list, okay, these are the symptoms I have, the doctor will review it, the doctor will talk to you, and then at the end of that assessment, he or she will decide, okay, I think you're dealing with I'm going to diagnose you with clinical depression, anxiety, bipolar, or I'm not going to diagnose you with anything. This is just normal teen angst, moods. Just maybe talk to a therapist. Maybe some talk therapy would be helpful, but I'm not going to diagnose you with anything. You don't need medication. But if you are diagnosed with something, most likely the doctor will say, okay, here's this medication I want you to try out, and go talk to a therapist. And it'll give you kind of a plan. And then you would take your medication and you talk to a therapist. Now, medication and therapy are a whole nother subjects that I will be covering in the future. I do have it planned, so I will be covering those more in depth. But for right now, I want you to know that that is the way it happens. That's the way you get help. If you want to just sit there and try to will your thoughts away, that's not gonna happen. I've never known someone who did that. So I want you to follow this plan, know the symptoms, and then after you know the symptoms, if you identify them in yourself, talk to somebody. You have to talk to somebody and have that somebody take you to a doctor. Take you to a doctor, get an assessment. If you're diagnosed, take medication, see a therapist, and then keep up different ways of healing. I wrote an entire ebook purely for the healing part of depression. Every single thing that I did to overcome my depression, and I still do. You can find that for free. Link is in the description. It'll pop up at the end of this video. I think that's how YouTube works. I don't know. We'll see if it happens. No, it will. I'm kidding. It will. So take these, break the stigma. Don't be afraid. Talk about this with your parent. Talk about this with a trusted adult, with trusted friends. Just grow your circle of people you trust, people who can support you. You don't have to share your story with the entire world. But if you are suffering, you have to share your story with somebody. You have to share your story with somebody if you want help. You have to share your story with somebody if you want to overcome this. If you want to feel better, if you want to feel happy, you have to. You have to communicate with somebody. Out of all these different things, that is one thing I want you to make sure that you do. Even if you're not depressed, and you're just going through stuff, talk to somebody, find someone to talk to. That's what school counselors are there for. That's what your parents are there for, trusted friends. That's what they're there for. So stay strong, stay awesome, and remember that you can't be erased. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, you'll find a link to my ebook down below and it'll pop up in the screen in a couple seconds. Make sure you're subscribing. Make sure that you're commenting. Tell me what you want me to cover next. I will see you tomorrow. Be unashamed, stay unashamed.